Welcome to Beyond the Powerline Road. Oftentimes I try to provide you a message of inspiration. Today I want to give you a message of something to ponder, something to think about. Normally I also don't try to give you a date. In other words, I try to keep my messages general so that, hey, they may be useful for someone that listens to one in January or June or July. But today I am sitting here at day before Easter, and yesterday was Good Friday, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you. Now, you will find some of these thoughts to be a little unique, a little different, and some of them you may agree with. I am not trying to twist your arm on them, but I have always sort of run into a little bit of a problem with Matthew chapter 12. And Matthew chapter 12 says, "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." So, of course, we understand that the heart of the earth is an idiom used to explain that he is buried or that he is, within the tomb. And, there is no other thought process other than that, even though a previous or a particular religion tries to claim that Jesus went to hell for 3 days, and we know that can't be. So what we are looking at, and I'm going to read it again, Matthew 12:40. "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." In other words, Jesus was buried. And to count the days, you really need to kind of look at 1, 2, and 3. And yet, if we look at Good Friday as the day that Jesus died, hey, we're missing a day. And so I want to kind of bring up some of the concepts and thoughts associated with, is it 3 days or 2 days? So Matthew 28:1 has a very interesting verse that is not always translated as I think it should be. Now, we can discuss the translation of it, but Matthew 28:1 is only translated this way in the International Standard Version. Now, I usually use ESV, King James, or New King James because those are the three I like the best. But the International Standard Version says this: "After the Sabbaths," notice the plural, "around dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to take a look at the burial site." Okay, so, the translation is a little bit different than the King James, but what is very important and very interesting is "after the Sabbaths." And I went to look up the word in the Greek, trying to find out what word should have been there. And it does, in my opinion, seem like it should be the word Sabbaths, plural. And here's my take on what has happened over the period of translations, or the time of translations. And the Bible has been translated by so many different groups and so many different times. But for the most part, Sabbaths, I think, became Sabbath. And I know all of you go, well, wait a minute, Sabbath day is from Friday night to Saturday night. I mean, it is basically Saturday. And we do think of that, but at the same time, we are looking at Passover weekend, or Passover week. And so the first day of the Passover feast, Nisan 15, is the calendar date on the Jewish calendar, and I might be mispronouncing Nisan, but Nisan 15 also carried the solemnness, the specificity of a Sabbath. In other words, it was to be treated like a Sabbath. People were not supposed to do work on the Sabbath. As a matter of fact, the sacrificial lamb was to be killed on the 14th because of the fact that it was to be treated as a Sabbath, which means people didn't travel far, they didn't do extra work. Oh, they certainly didn't bury people. So Nisan 15 was to be treated as a Sabbath. Now, in 2023, Thursday, April 6th, was the 15th of Nisan. In 2024, the 15th of Nisan falls on Tuesday, April 23rd. So basically what happens is the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar are definitely different, and there are different dates and times for which Nisan 15 falls. And so there is always a weekly Sabbath, which begins on sunset on Friday through sunset on Saturday. And in addition to the weekly Sabbath, there are other days throughout the year that require a Sabbath rest. And it is customary that work is not done on these days. And there are 7 high Sabbaths, and they were the Passover, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, the Feast of the First Fruits, the Feast of Pentecost, or Pentecost week, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of the Tabernacle. And it's very interesting that Jesus was crucified as the Passover lamb at Passover week. So, if I were to read John 19:31, and John 19:31 clearly tells us that the particular Sabbath that was coming up was a high day. And in other words, it was a very significant Sabbath. So was Jesus crucified because Nisan 15 fell on a Saturday, or was Jesus crucified and made certain that he was dead before Nisan 15? And did it fall on a Friday, or did it fall on a Saturday? And so I'm going to read, and I'll probably try to explain this some more, but in 31, it says, "Therefore, because of the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day," which is very interesting that they talk about this Sabbath as being a high day. And the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away. And the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and the other, who was crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, and so they did not break his legs. And of course, this is to keep Scripture fulfilled, that not a bone was broken, but, it is also because of the fact that the Jewish holiday was significant enough where they did not want to be burying someone or pulling somebody off of a cross from crucifixion on a Sabbath. So it seems that Jesus died on Nisan 14 because Nisan 15 was a holy day. And in Luke 22, I just kind of want to go back. It says, "Now the Feast of Unleavened Breads drew nigh, which were called the Passover." And in verse 7, by the way, that was verse 1, "Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed," Nisan 14. "And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare for us a Passover that we may eat." Now, Passover isn't a week or even a day, but it is a meal on the 14th, or actually the evening of the 14th, in the month of the Nisan on the Hebrew calendar, and it corresponds with the date in March or April on the Gregorian calendar. And recall that all days start in the evening in the Jewish calendar. So on the evening of the 14th, the Passover meal was prepared and eaten. And interestingly, it sort of seems like Jesus and the apostles may have had a Passover a day early. Remember, I had mentioned that there are some questions that I haven't quite figured out on this, but what happens is Jesus did indeed have his apostles prepare for a Passover meal. And so if I go to a link on the internet, and this is by a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Turner, And he talks about the Passover meal, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It says, in addition to a weekly Sabbath and possibly new moon holy days, the Torah identifies annual festival holidays linked to agricultural cycles. And because of these agricultural cycles, the Passover begins in a repeated cycle in the spring on the 14th of the first month, the 14th of Nisan. And so the day of the 14th is just before the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So at some point, it seems like Passover and unleavened bread in the biblical translations may have been thought of or changed to in the New Testament to describe kind of the same thing. So we have to differentiate between Passover and the week of unleavened bread. And we go to Leviticus 23, and it says the first month of the 14th of the month, and in the afternoon, the Passover to the Lord, and on the 15th of the month, the festival of Matzah, or the festival of unleavened bread, to the Lord, and thou shalt eat matzah, or unleavened bread, for 7 days. So, what is the Passover on the 14th? It is not the festival of matzah. Since it only begins in the evening of the day of, in the evening of the 15th, or the evening of the 14th, which would be the beginning of the 15th. I know the 14th, the evening to evening seems very strange for those of us in the Western world. But it was a Passover offering in which the slaughtered on the 14th were eaten that night, and the 15th, together with the matzah in the festival of the festival of matzah, or the festival of the unleavened bread. So, what is happening is it seems like the Passover feast was eaten by Jesus and his apostles, but Jesus, being the Passover lamb, may very well have died on the 14th of Matzah if the 15th of Matzah was on Friday. So here's my timeline. Here's the timeline that I think may have occurred. On Wednesday, Nisan 13, they prepared the Passover for the evening. The evening of the 14th, Thursday, Passover meal, they go to the garden and pray, and midnight, Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. So what happens is we are looking at what they would consider as Thursday by midnight, or actually by evening. And Thursday morning, Jesus is judged and crucified. And early afternoon, he dies on the cross. And they bury him hurriedly before the evening turns to the 15th of Matzah. And he's buried, and there's day one in the grave. So he's buried on Thursday. Starting our time Thursday evening, the 15th of Matzah, Feast of the Unleavened Bread, and so there's night one. Friday continues the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, Nisan 15. That's day 2, and that is considered a Sabbath, or has the same rights and characteristics of a Sabbath. Friday evening start of the High Sabbath is Nisan 16, and we are looking at night 2 in the grave. And then Saturday rolls around, Sabbath day, which is day 3. Saturday night, Nisan 17, is night 3. And then Resurrection Sunday is Nisan 17. Now, during a cross-reference between the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar, it is somewhat confusing because the year that Jesus apparently died and was resurrected, Nisan 15, seems to be on a Thursday. However, the cross-reference does have a disclaimer, and the cross-reference stated that because of the Gregorian dates, because Pope Gregory back in the 1700s, 1752, added and subtracted like 11 days to the calendar, so we're not altogether certain when Nisan 15 is and what day it was. This is kind of not unlike the Caesar in AD 40 or BC 46 that made the longest day of the year by adding days to that particular calendar. In BC 46, the length of the year was 445 days. So the Gregorian calendar moved a little bit, and we are not altogether, and I am not altogether certain when Nisan 15 occurred. Did it occur on a Thursday? Did it occur on a Friday, which makes sense to me, or did it occur on a Saturday? So, the first day of Passover, which is the Jewish calendar is Nisan 15, is a holiday Sabbath on whatever day of the week it occurs. That year, it may have fallen on a Friday, which means that the holiday Sabbath of Passover began Thursday evening. So when I go back and read Matthew 12:20, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so was the Son of Man 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, I feel I have a better understanding of it. And I hope I didn't confuse anybody today. Have a wonderful Easter.